One of the ways that guys build courage and confidence is by stacking up wins.
If you're a man craving deeper purpose, stronger relationships, or a more grounded sense of self, this one's for you.
I had been interested most of my life in men's work. Even before there was men's work, I was interested in it before Robert Bly published Iron John in 1990.
Father Michael Butler has spent over 30 years as an Orthodox priest and pastoral counselor, walking with men through everything from confession to crisis. If you don't know where to start with your health. Start with the social group that you've always been called to go to.
I'm retiring from full-time parish ministry at the end of the year, and I hope to move more into just regular men's work after that. I don't need another 60-hour-a-week job, believe me.
But his real fire, helping men reclaim strength and sacredness through the 4 cardinal virtues. His work cuts through the noise to help men stand taller, love deeper, and live like they mean it. All right, Father Michael, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because in the encounters that I've had with you in all of our conversations, you bring with you a wealth of experience and knowledge and insight, not only in men's work, but also in ministry and in faith. And you actually come together at a really interesting intersection that I find. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. And for anybody that's new, I'd love to just hear you share a little bit about your background and what's brought you to where you are.
Happy to talk about that. I guess sort of the root of the whole story is, well, first I'm a native Texan. I grew up in a little town in East Texas, and kind of the root event of my life was the death of my father in an industrial accident when I was 8 years old. And I think that's really the thing that set me on kind of a lifelong quest. My dad wasn't there for me, in a certain respect. Later years, I realized I'd felt abandoned in some respects, even though it was not intentional at all, but somehow Dad wasn't there for me. And, as children, we always want to internalize those sorts of things. What was wrong with me that Dad didn't stick around for me seemed to play into some of my thinking for a long time. And so that was kind of the defining event. I was the fat kid in school, also picked last in sports and all that. I lost a little weight in high school and again in college, but still uncoordinated, poor self-image, scarcely dated through high school or college. Really, I think my wife was the 4th woman I ever dated and was with, so that was, very kind of limited experience that way. I had when I was, Mama remarried after Dad had died, and my stepdad moved us down to South Texas on the Mexican border where he had grown up, and I fell in with a bad group and was stealing from the school and got caught. And even though my mother had quit going to church, we were raised Roman Catholic, and Mama got mad at God after Dad died and quit going to church, but I continued to go. But even though she wasn't a practicing Catholic, she could lay on Catholic guilt with the best of them. Stealing is a mortal sin. You can go to hell for this, which terrified me. So I really went to confession for the first time in my life. I was about 15 years old. I don't remember the confession. I was just terrified. I knew the priest on the other side realized he had a tender soul and was very gentle with me. But walking out of that church afterwards, it was February the 4th, 1975 at 4:55 in the afternoon. Again, South Texas, so it was subtropical. It was very mild. But I walked down that sidewalk and suddenly the world changed. The light went golden. I heard the song that creation sings to its maker, and I knew in an instant that there was a God, he was personal, and that he loved me, and it turned me inside out. And I am a priest today, and we're having this conversation in part because of that event. I wanted to be a Catholic priest for a long time. In college, I discovered the Orthodox Church and converted to Orthodoxy. I met Annette, the woman who I've now been married to for 40 years, just celebrating our anniversary like about 3 weeks ago. So I met her about the same time, and got married, got my PhD, lived in Dallas a while, moved to Michigan, started our family. I have two sons, and things were going. I was okay. Was okay. Life was going okay. I ended up eventually ordained, um, and serving a parish, and it was okay. But somehow it wasn't really flourishing well. And one day, about 15 years ago, um, things had things were not going as well as I thought. Life was beginning to fray. And one Sunday, I lost 13 members of my congregation, 20% of our annual budget, lost my council president, my choir director, a lot of key people. Um, my youngest son was in trouble with the law continuously. We knew he was smoking pot and drinking. We had no idea it was as bad as it was. Um, and one Wednesday, I wasn't feeling really well, and I went to the doctor, and I ended up in a straitjacket, tied down to a board, hyperventilating, and crying hysterically in the back of an ambulance in a full-blown panic attack. I'd never had one of these before. Um, it, it undid me. It completely undid me, and I realized that life was really not sustainable. I thought I was doing okay. I was actually holding on with white knuckles. And they gave me an absolutely excellent therapist. I couldn't have asked for better. This crusty old dude, raised on the south side of Chicago in the bad neighborhoods and all. And he wouldn't take any shit from me whatsoever. And in like about 3 sessions, he like knocked the crap out of me, and got me very well set on a path. I loved the guy. It was exactly what I needed at the right time. And that's what kind of started my personal journey into self-development, personal improvement and all. Um, I had been interested most of my life, in men's work, even before there was men's work. I was interested in it before Robert Bly published Iron John in 1990. I was scrapping for, you know, articles or, little new age publications from Southern California that we couldn't get in Texas because there was some little article in there about Robert Bly or, old poets shaking things down in the woods up in Mendocino, and stuff like that. I just couldn't get my hands on it. And so as that whole movement developed, I followed it assiduously, and was involved in some of the stuff that went on in the Mythopoeic Men's movement, some other stuff. When John Eldridge came out with Wild at Heart, I went out, I did retreat with him. I've done some work with Father Richard Rohr, you know, um, and more recently, as you know, with Connor Beaton as well. But between my undergraduate work in archetypal psychology, my interest in men's work, and a late blooming interest in bodybuilding, all of these things sort of came together in a way that really got me interested in help as I got older too. We were joking before we started on here about me being nearly 65 and bringing some kind of gray beard wisdom to the conversation. But I realized that I do have something to say, and it seems to resonate with some younger men. And then in about the last 6 years, there's been this remarkable phenomenon of all of these young men coming to the Orthodox Church. It's not just us. I mean, very traditional Catholic communities are seeing the same thing. Some of the more conservative Protestant churches are seeing the same thing. But these young guys are coming, 20 somethings. And in the Orthodoxy, I mean, by the thousands. And so I've got a couple or 3 dozen of them in my parish, and they show up every week. And they all come with the same kind of presenting issues, or the same kind of I won't say problems, but they're all, stuck somewhere between late adolescence and early adulthood. They're having trouble adulting, getting rid of some adolescent habits. As I'm fond of saying, you know, 15 years of smoking weed and playing video games and jerking off to porn are not really the best preparation for life. And, sooner or later, these guys kind of figure it out, and then they realize, they got nothing to offer, and they don't quite know how to grow up or where to go from here. And, you know, ain't no woman that wants to take two looks at them. And, you know, they really would like a serious relationship and to settle down, and they're just kind of lost. And so I found that all of everything that I'd been through in my life, all my interests and all my studies have all kind of come together in just the last few years in a way that is really addressing a recent cultural move among young men who are looking for something, and they're looking for a transcendent purpose to believe in. I think that's why they're coming to the church. They want something big and bold and meaningful to give their lives to. And I think a lot of things in the world are kind of disappointing them right now. So Christ and his church seems to be a good choice. They're looking for structure because their lives are chaotic, their lives are anxious, the world is chaotic and anxious. And they're looking for structure. And if the Orthodox Church has got one thing, it's got structure. So they come looking for that. And I think in a lot of cases, they come looking for Dad 2.0. And I know how to do that without creating dependency on myself, you know, just to help them to be there. It's, you know, it's a mentoring role, and I can kind of see what they're looking for. I kind of see what their problems are. And I help get them on their feet, provide a little external structure, give them something big to believe in. And it's remarkable, you know, they kind of shape up pretty good. And they find that they begin to flourish in ways that they never did before. So the opportunities for me to do more of that work have expanded outside the church. And I'm beginning to find that I do have a hearing. I have something worth saying, and people like what I have to say. So as I mentioned also earlier, I'm retiring from full-time parish ministry at the end of the year, and I hope to move more into just regular men's work after that. I don't need another 60-hour-a-week job, believe me, but yeah, it's one of the things that, you know, at least when you work for yourself, I hope I have the sense enough to restrict the number of clients or the number of retreats and workshops I do. And if I don't, my wife, I'm sure, will tell me. So that's very wide and rambling, but that's kind of who I am and what I do.
That's beautiful. I actually, as you were talking, I made a note about how you mentioned that men are coming in droves
Here
into
you are.
Orthodoxy, and I found that extremely interesting, and also something that I have observed even from the outside. And you listed a couple of the things that I think, even beyond the church, that so many men are craving, and obviously it makes sense. You know, the structure to the chaos,
Yeah.
male mentorship or father figure,
Hmm.
a transcendental purpose. I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Why is having a sense of a greater purpose something that is so fundamental uh, to what men are looking for?
Um, okay, I'm gonna have to talk around. That's a really good question. I'm gonna have to talk around it for a moment till I get maybe to a more central answer. The easy answer is actually comes from Saint Augustine. At the very first paragraph of his Confessions, which he wrote back in the fourth, fifth century, he says he's talking to God, and he says, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you."
Mm.
And so the Christian answer to that is that we are designed, the hardware and the software is designed for a transcendent purpose beyond what we're able to achieve here. And I think just even in a broader sense, and even not in a religious context, I think men always strive for something more. We feel we want to conquer, you know, that it's part of our biology. You know, we sort of, I choose the words carefully, you know, we penetrate the world. You know, we want to go out, we want to be creative, we want, you know, there's a sense of personal agency, you know, that's built into our very bodies, but I think it goes beyond just that. And I've noted, I find it almost, and I won't say it's almost universal, but sort of, a good question. Has every man that I've ever met that's been satisfied and happy with his life, has he served something bigger than himself? And I think without thinking too deeply about it, I think it's true. You know, and this has sort of always been the expectation on men, and maybe because it is kind of built into our nature, sort of the four traditional things that men are supposed to do. There's to procreate, protect, provide, and preside. Okay. Well, we procreate children for whom we need to provide, but men provide not only for themselves, but we're expected to produce more than we ourselves need so that we have additional to support a wife or a family or to contribute something to the community. I mean, even in a lot of male friendships, a lot of men aren't willing to hang around with some guy who doesn't contribute anything to the group. I mean, you have to bring something to the group. Nobody appears empty-handed. And yeah, occasionally some guy's down on his luck or someone needs something and everybody pitches in and lifts him up. But that's sort of always understood kind of a temporary thing. Everyone's expected to pull their own weight and to add something to the community. And I think we're happiest when we do that. And a huge amount of men's self-esteem comes from being able to do that. I do a good job. I bring in money to the business. I bring home a good paycheck. I can provide well for my family, you know. And I mean, even, so, and I think part of the interesting thing that we see in the world today is, even sort of like traditional stories or an older culture, you always had the town drunk, or the village idiot. Okay. Every village could support one. Seriously, one. There's only one. And then everybody picks it. Okay. He fell off the ladder when he was a boy. Brains got scrambled. He's always a little touched. Fine, we'll take care of him, and you can put up with him and provide for him. But there isn't much patience for men who don't contribute anything, And I wonder if today, if our villages have a lot more useless men than we have in the past. And I'm inclined to think maybe we do. And I think that's part of some of the male malaise, that we have in the world today. It's just
agreed.
Maybe you see this, and maybe you can speak to it too. I mean, even with the education and the professionalization of women's jobs, women no longer need men to provide an income for them. They can do that on their own. Thank you very much. So men don't really need to provide anymore. The world is a very relatively safe place, at least in North America. So we're not needed to protect women anymore. So yeah, kind of what are we good for?
100%. And I think that's part of the crisis, and maybe the part of the pain or the underlying challenge that we're facing is we're in changing times. To what you named, where women now wonderfully can provide financially for themselves. And, we're safer than ever. We're not under imminent threat. We've got air controlled environments and,
Yeah.
all the wonderful luxuries of this modern life and all the trappings it brings with it. And what does that do for protecting, for providing? What does that actually mean then to protect and to provide and to serve something greater? Because I'd also actually like to double down and agree with you that as you said that, I don't think I've met anybody who's truly, that I've felt successful and fulfilled, that isn't serving something greater than himself. I truly don't think I've seen that. And I think what's happening too is that our culture is shifting. And so what does it look like to provide and protect in a shifting time? And I think that's part of the destabilizing force. And I was an educator previously, actually. So I worked almost 10 years in the public education system and saw firsthand how we are educating our children, our youth, to be able to look outside of them for what is right and what is true. And a lot of the times what they're looking outside to are not very compelling reasons. It's not faith-based. It's not something greater and broader. It's fear and punishment and do this thing and look to an authority to tell you how to live your life.
Mm.
And as you emerge from that, you're just thrown into the world without initiation, without rite of passage. So it's really, it's confusing for a lot of men. And that talk of, well, what does maturity look like? What does it even look like to provide and protect? Those discussions aren't necessarily happening in the mainstream. And so we're left with the repercussions of that void. And I'm curious, like, what do you see are part of the consequences of lacking that sense of purpose, that sense of contribution, that service to something greater. What are the consequences, and what does that actually look like when a man is kind of just bumbling around day to day?
I think what it looks like is a lot of, well, we sort of, we sort of make memes about it. Um, you know, the young man lying in the basement covered in Cheetos dust, playing video games, or as I heard it put one times, covered in Cheetos dust and crusty tissues. Um, you know, um, a lot of men just check out
Hmm.
and really don't want to grow up or contribute minimally. I mean, I think in some cases where the situation is hostile, that's typically what men do. I mean, men just go on strike. They very quietly quit engaging and step back.
Hmm.
If I'm not appreciated here, why am I, if it's I don't know, a hostile work environment, or even maybe at home where there isn't a lot of support, or where it's chaotic or troubled, or there are issues, a lot of guys will simply withdraw. And so there's a lack of potential. And again, because we're not serving anything. Oh, that old song I remember quote. Who was that? That old jazz song. I'm ashamed of myself. Like, you're gonna have to serve somebody.
Hmm.
It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. And I think there's truth in that. And when men don't, what do? They feel diminished. Is this where some depression comes from? And some anxiety. And then self-medicating behavior, of course, we both see plenty of that. And not only, the hard stuff like porn, drugs, alcohol, weed, but I mean, even, in my own pastoral experience, I've known far too many men, who can't deal with their families on the weekend. And so check out and, lay on the couch and watch sports ball for 6 or 8 hours every weekend, just so they don't have to engage, or because they can't engage. know, And then we lead diminished lives. And then the world is not a better place either, because men are not living up to their potential. They're not contributing what they can. So I think there is a lot of male unhappiness out there. And, I see it in the young guys who come to the church. They want more, but they're not quite sure what more even looks like. They did everything right. They did everything they were supposed to do. And kind of like, where's the reward, or where's my place to step in? I expected a position, I went to school, I got the tech degree, now I'm stuck in this entry level salary position for God knows how long in a cube farm somewhere. I never expected engineering was going to look like this. Oh, and there is a lot of that. And actually, that was something I circled back kind of to my life story when I had my panic attack. I remember it was a week or two afterwards when I'd first started working with my therapist. I actually wrote in my journal, I have done everything right. I have done everything I was supposed to do, except live my own life.
Hmm.
And it was like, word of mercy. Living up to everybody else's expectations, being a good boy, and he's crushing my soul. Terrible thing for a priest to say. You expect, you go to the church, especially, sort of, I'm ordained and paid, to promote the gospel in a way out of that sort of thing. And yet there I was, and still it hadn't completely gelled for me. But it hadn't.
Hmm.
That's the truth of it. Things are much better now. But cleared up some misunderstandings I had about following Christ. Yeah, it doesn't absolve me of doing my own work,
Hmm.
which some people think.
Hmm. It's interesting that you say that. I do think too, as you mentioned, with the, turning to porn or drugs or alcohol or any of these things, I think it almost could just be broadened to chasing quick hits of dopamine rather than choosing to be disciplined and maybe sacrifice a short-term pleasure because you know where you're going and you're willing to be able to, like that marshmallow experience, not eat the
Yeah,
marshmallow right now, but to be able to wait and allow it to multiply and to be able to serve something that's greater. And it does require discipline. And I think that's really
look,
what discipline is to me, is the ability and willingness to sacrifice the short-term pleasure for the long-term kingdom. that you're building and serving.
Yeah.
And
I think
um,
just further, just as you say that,
yeah,
yeah. And it's not just men are turning to self-medication, but I think even more socially acceptable things that,
yeah,
where you just throw yourself into your work. I don't know if we can still talk about workaholism. Um, but certainly, that's probably one of the places where men find the most satisfaction, even if it's a grueling, grinding, soul-crushing existence. At least, by God, you can put in 40 hours a week and bring home a paycheck, and there's something to show at the end of it.
I think that's actually a really important piece. Funny enough, I just got back from a golf tournament from with all my university football buddies that I
Oh,
played
okay.
university football with. There was 28 of us, and it was amazing. And that every year I go, the conversations continue to get deeper. And maybe that's the cohesion of the group, and as they're maturing, or maybe it's because they're becoming parents, husbands. Their role in life is shifting, and what they were doing before just isn't seeming to work. And I had countless conversations that weekend with men who were resentful, lost, confused, frustrated, a lot of them getting to that point where they've been working hard, they've been providing. It's not the drugs, it's not these things that are throwing them off, but they're getting to this place where they're experiencing extreme resent and frustration in their relationship, in their life, because they're either consciously, or more of them even unconsciously, getting to the place where they've been putting everybody else before them and seeking approval from their partner, from their friends, from their work, and getting to this place where they don't even know what they want for themselves. They don't even know or have their own
Okay.
approval.
This is good. This is beautiful, because here we are talking about all of the traditional masculine things of providing and protecting and going out and being service to other people, but not at the expense of your own soul. You
That's
know,
it.
you've gained the whole world. Yeah, that's in the gospel. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul in the
Mm,
process? So
mm.
there's the balance to the piece. Okay, how much attention do we need to give to ourselves? And and see, and again, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but something on the inside needs to shift so that it can be done from a place of abundance rather than a place of need, or from a place of personal fullness and self-validation rather than validation seeking outside or somewhere. Something needs to change in here. And that's worth talking about.
It
Yeah.
really is. And I'd love to double down on that and actually lean into it, because I think on the surface, it could actually look, it becomes a pretty nuanced discussion, because on the surface, you could look at two individuals who are providing, doing the day to day, bringing all this in, and one is feeling fulfilled and happy and content, nourished in himself and in his relationship, and the other's miserable and resentful, because
Yes.
all of that is tied to that external validation piece. It's all tied to, am I doing this good enough? Am I doing it right? And when I don't get the validation, when I don't get the approval, well, then all of a sudden it drops. So what's your take on that? Like this approval seeking behavior that seems to be a pretty common pattern among so many men, and I'm sure you see it.
Yeah, actually I see it among everybody.
Yeah.
But every time I talk about women and their experiences, I get shot down. So we'll stay with men here. It's just the safer discussion for me. Um, that's a really good question. Again, I'm not quite sure what to say, but there is this, and even when I'm 2 years ago, I did my first men's retreat at my church, and I called it Beloved Sons.
Hmm.
And I worked off of the phrase in the gospel, "You are my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased," which God the Father says to Jesus. But I extrapolated that out because so many men have never heard it said to them, "You're my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased." And I found the depth of need there, the genuine hunger for a word of approval, some encouragement, even yes, as an older man myself, for the blessing of an older man or the blessing of an elder. It's not necessarily a priestly blessing. I can do that professionally, but just as an older man, to speak a word of encouragement and support to a younger man. I had no idea the need was so great. It was almost overwhelming at sometimes. And I'm not quite sure where that comes from. Although I did have a conversation with a 26-year-old man earlier today where, he was going on about something, and I realized nobody's ever complimented this guy. In fact, he was telling a story that he was young, he had 4 children, and he was in a department store one day, and this very old guy, he's an old dude with a cane, probably about 80 years old or something, just said, "Man, you're doing such a great job. Look at you. You got a beautiful wife. You got 4 beautiful kids. Man, you're doing wonderfully here. I'm really proud of you." And he says, just like gobsmacked him. And it's like still mentioning it 3 days later to me. He's still riding high from that one comment. And what I'm sure I don't know quite what to say. You have insight on this? I mean, talk
Well,
back. Maybe I can
yeah,
think.
maybe I'll share. Like, I actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Robert Glover, and we were talking more
Yeah, I heard that.
specifically
Yes. Yeah.
about women.
Uh-huh.
But he had mentioned, if as long as a man is seeking approval from a woman, he will not be able to reach full maturity.
Okay.
And I think we could expand that beyond a woman. As I think, as long as we're outsourcing approval for what is right or wrong, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if we can touch on that full place of like serving from the highest, the highest good. Really, all of it's going to be more transactional, I think, rather than it is
Okay. Yeah.
in a deeply relational way. And it might stem back all the way. One of my first thoughts around that, it would be stemming back all the way to childhood. All the places that I didn't get approval as a child, or emotionally absent father or
Yeah.
mother, where I didn't get these things, and I'm starting to look for it outside of myself in these unconscious patterns where I'm just playing out approval seeking behavior. That it might look, I work primarily with high performing men who are externally successful and checked a lot of boxes, myself included. That's where I was at.
Good.
And realizing that most of what I was doing was just chasing more. I kept chasing more. I was on the treadmill of more.
Okay.
And
More sound,
realizing
chasing more sounds like addiction.
it was an addiction that, I was climbing a mountain and, reaching more. But what actually started to happen, the more success I started to have, the more depressed I started to feel, because the illusion that more would solve it started to fade.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
then what I was left with was this realization that started as a soft hum and started to become a loud roar, that more wasn't going to save me, and that I needed to actually shift something in my life and really resource this from a different place, and start to not look outside of myself for approval, and rather, really do some inner work to cultivate self-approval. But I'm curious, from your take too, like, how does a man start to make that shift from where he's looking outside of himself for being the good boy, doing the right things? He's maybe, probably, if we're honest, resentful in his relationship, maybe
Mhm.
resentful with people around him or family members, maybe because his boundaries have been trampled on, or he's never got the recognition that he thought all his service would do.
Mhm.
Where does a man start in that pile when he's sitting in his frustration and resentment? I just talked to a bunch of them this weekend, and curious to hear your take.
Um, on the one hand, okay, I think I covered this a couple of ways. On the one hand, it was the sort of the realization that I was trying to get across to in that retreat a couple of years ago, that the idea of, yeah, is sort of, when God says you're okay, then by God you're okay.
Hmm.
That you don't need validation from every place else, but when you're firmly established in your faith, then that's really the only validation you need. And for some guys, that seemed to work. So I realized that can easily, if you're not careful with that, I realize the potential for abuse and spiritual bypassing there. So I'm not that is not what I'm talking about. Okay. A genuine sense of validation by God from a genuine relationship. From other things, I think I would, a lot of the work that I do, everything I do is sort of based, I use as a framework the four cardinal virtues of courage, self-control, prudence, and justice. And I always start with courage for a number of reasons. But one of the ways that guys build courage and confidence is by stacking up wins. We don't somehow gin up some feeling of courage and then go out and accomplish things. Rather, we accomplish things and we in small things, and then we find that our courage and our confidence grows. So it might be a matter of returning to your roots and taking stock and looking and seeing where, in fact, in life you really are winning, and a genuine appreciation for what we've actually accomplished. And maybe that may take some stepping back and some assistance to get men genuinely to look at themselves in a sympathetic and compassionate way to say, yeah, I really am okay. I really did do all right. Yeah, I've actually got these sweet skills. Look, I'm pulling in 80 grand a year, not for nothing. I've, I'm really good at sales, and the bonus at the end of the year is fantastic. So I got that going for me. And I mean, there are a lot of guys who are very confident, but the ones that but a lot of them are not. And especially the younger men that I work with, every so often I'll get someone to worry about, oh, young men, and they're so arrogant and this, that, and the other. Yeah, they peacock is, as bad as anybody else, of course. But most of them are suffering from a crushing lack of self-esteem, and finding ways to say, no, look what you got going for yourself, and to get them genuinely to appreciate that they do have gifts, that they do have talents, and it's not all just potential. The worst things you can say to a young man was said to me, "Oi, he's a nice boy. He's got potential." I'm not saying I don't mean that. Clearly, man, you got something going for yourself. Why can't you acknowledge it?
Mm,
Which I guess is perhaps a deeper question.
mm.
Oh,
Yeah, that's really
maybe not.
interesting. I love the piece. I've asked this quite a lot in men's retreats and in the work I do, to point out where you're falling short. But
Mm-hmm.
then, they're much quicker to answer that question than they are to say, well, where are you winning? Where are you
Where you?
thriving? What makes you awesome? And that I find
Oh,
that an interesting piece, that piece around bringing celebration, self-compassion there. Obviously that can swing so far the other way and can become dismissive. Another thing you said there that I really like is building that stack of evidence. Part of what I talk about sometimes is building up the stack of evidence that proves I'm the man that I'm becoming,
oh,
not the man that all of my, that I've inherited or all these stories that I have about myself, but I'm building a stack of evidence that I am the one that does what I say I'm going to do. I am the one that is showing up, that is serving, that is, as I build that stack of evidence, all of a sudden I don't just need mantras in the mirror. I can literally look to all the things that I'm doing every single day that prove that. And I'd even reduce it back, coming back to what you first said there, faith and brotherhood. I think these are two fundamental pillars that would help any man on his journey,
yeah.
regardless of what his faith looked like. But, brotherhood or mentorhood or some kind of connection with somebody who we trust and respect, I think is a vital lifeline to self-development.
I've said more than once that every time I have made a significant advance in my life, I had a mentor or a teacher or a coach. I look back and realize it is absolutely true. Um, and I think you're right on that. And here is where men can really step up if they want to help, if they really want to make a difference, and if they're looking for something bigger than themselves to serve. Well, it's the younger guy in the office. It's the teenager around the corner. It's some other guy at the church or wherever at work, wherever it is. The gym bro that doesn't say very much. I'm not saying go and invade people's spaces and make yourself odious, and thrust yourself into other people's lives, but you can establish a good relationship with someone younger than yourself. think this can mean a lot. And I've pointed this out too, and I'll point it out to your audience as well. That's not just for us old guys. All right. Do you know how much it means to a high school guy when a college age guy says, dude, that was a sweet move?
Mm.
Because the college age guy is exactly where that high school guy wants to be. It, it doesn't matter. You can have a word of encouragement and support for somebody else, and it can change a man's life, especially a young man's life.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering, for yourself, if you would, I think you're absolutely right. Yes, find a mentor, someone who can help, who can lift you up, who can call out from you something more than you maybe see for yourself, who can see more clearly than you can what the potential is in there. And yeah, someone who's maybe good enough to where he can, you know, when you need an arm around your shoulders or a kick in the ass, either way, he can do that for you. I'm wondering if there's not also a piece where, like I say, where we in turn, having received that and appreciated just how good that is and how beneficial it is, if out of gratitude for having received that mentoring ourselves, we turn around and provide it for somebody else. I think that's an essential part of it too, because it can't end with us.
1,000%. And funny enough, I think, again, back to the conversations this weekend, a lot of those guys who played football and were mentored at a pretty semi professional level, like pretty high level football, a lot of them now are coaching. And it's very interesting because I asked one of them, like, where is the source of joy in your life? And had virtually no answers except for where he's coaching, except for where he's serving and giving back to, these younger people who were walking in the similar steps as he was a couple decades ago.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it. I believe it. I think I'm. This is one thing I tell some of the younger guys. I say I think life is designed sort of eventually to get us to that point because we all start out selfish bastards, and then we find a young woman, and suddenly, and we settle down and get into a long relationship, get married. Suddenly we can't live for ourselves. We have to live for somebody else, and she complains because you leave a hairball on the soap, and you complain because she leaves beauty stuff all over the bathroom and you can't get to the sink, and you learn to adjust. And then once you've kind of stretched that far, then you start getting ready for children, and then you have a kid, and then now you're stretched even more. You have to live for somebody else, and it ain't easy. I did not find having kids easy at all. But this is how you grow, and you learn patience, and your heart expands and you dilate. And then when your kids get a little bit older, suddenly you don't care just for your kids. You start caring for everybody else's kids. Yeah, and that's when you start leading Boy Scout groups, or you start coaching football, or going with them to the dojo, or whatever it is you do, and suddenly you're engaged with a bunch of other kids as well. And I think this is the way that over the course of our lifetime, our hearts dilate to where eventually you hope at some point when you're older, you're able to love not only everybody else's kids, but love everybody. And
Mm.
then we become one of those grandparents that we always hope. Those beautiful old people. I have them. I've had them in every congregation that I've pastored. Those old people who are just a blessing to everybody, who are always got a smile, who always have a kind word, and who are just a joy to be around. And I think that's the fruit of a life well lived. And then on the other hand, we have those bitter, angry, resentful older people who are small and curled in on themselves, and who are in no way a blessing to anybody else. They just sort of suck the life and the energy out of any group or conversation and all. And I see. I'm old enough to realize I have that potential in me, and I have to fight it. But I could see both paths are still open to me. But I think that's it. We start very selfish, and then through relationship with another person, it dilates, and then with children, it dilates, then we other children, eventually our hearts get big and we encompass the whole world. I
Mm.
think that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes so much sense. And, I have this thing I keep telling myself, like, Stu, life will make you bitter or better. And the choice is yours because you really can't control what happens, but that response and that reaction. And I'm curious, like going back even earlier, because there's a lot of men who have surface connections that maybe are a mile wide and an inch deep, and loneliness is becoming more and more prevalent. There's massive amounts, like the amount of men that can say that they have nobody that they would confide in with some of their deepest issues, is quite alarming, honestly. And like, what would you share? What do you share, I guess, even with men, like before they hit rock bottom? Like, I'm trying to reach more men that before the divorce happens, before, the panic attack that sends you spiraling, before, the life altering crises that leaves you at a serious choice point. Like, how do you reach more men before they get to that point about, coming back to do that inner excavating and be more in alignment with what they're really wanting, I guess.
I suppose the way that I do it personally, and this comes out pastorally as well, is, I guess, to put it in kind of, this sounds clinical and cold, I guess I model
Yeah.
the behavior that I want. And so um, when I get a new guy who comes to the church, or anybody who comes to the church, I'm giving away my secrets to how to grow a church or how to grow any organization here. We always get a visitor's card. See, I have one here right now on my desk that I'm going to follow up. I have followed up on, um, but I make contact within 24 hours if someone comes to the church, and I schedule coffee with them. I happen to love Paneras, and they're convenient to me around. I used to have stock in Paneras. I was at them so much when it was publicly traded. I actually own stock. But I go have coffee at Paneras, and amidst all the other questions, I always probe to get something a little deeper, a little intimate, a little authentic, and really push for a conversation on that level. And we'll share my own story, and we'll speak from a very vulnerable and open place. And it's remarkable because people will open up. Then, well, one of two things is going to happen whenever you open your heart. Either the other person is going to shut down because they can't deal with the intimacy, and they're going to withdraw. They're going to backpedal as fast as they can, or they will open their heart in return. And I hear confessions, all the tens of thousands of them over the course of 30 years. And I see that in the confessional as well. As people get to trust you, they open up more and more and more. And there's a real intimacy of communication right there, which even when dealing with very difficult issues sometimes is still remarkably vivifying because it's so damned honest and open, And I'm sure you have that, in your men's group, maybe dealing with really, really hard issues, but the simple fact that you've opened your heart and some other guy's opened his heart, is just like God, these kinds of conversations, they could carry you for ages. So I try to be as open and as honest as I can. At some point, these conversations with people, what I find is that the barriers begin to come down, a little bit of trust is established, and then they open up. And once I can kind of get them there, I have about an 80% retention rate, so, so that's sort of the business side. But the ultimate thing is, model it. And I guess be comfortable enough in your own skin that you're willing to take off the armor a little, show your own heart a little bit, show the other guy that you're not scared of him. I mean, I know forgive me, I don't mean to mischaracterize you, but I assume sort of in your wing of men's work, there's a little more, um, um, I don't know, standing with an open heart and direct gaze kind of work than perhaps the stuff I do. I remember reading stuff like that in David Data, which I always found, and it was an interesting way of putting it, but I think he's fundamentally correct in that. And to be able to stand your ground, to be grounded and firm in who you are, and nevertheless to stand there openly, it's not easy to do, but with a little bit of practice, I think we can get there. And it's easier to do let me take that back. I think it's easier for adults to do with children because there's nothing, very little to fear from children. Once they become teenagers, there's a lot to fear, and you have to be a lot more careful there. But after that period is gone, with some adults, I think it's very easy, and I think we have an intuitive sense. Who can I just be honest and open with, and I don't have to. I can put down my guard entirely, and let's just get raw
Hmm.
on this conversation. And when you do, that's where real transformation happens.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is essentially just living that message, living,
Just to live the message, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
being,
And I mean, it's on the one hand, it's not being hypocritical. I mean, you can say the right things, but the problem with hypocrisy is that your words lack power
yeah,
because they're not authentic. You're not living them yourself. You have no direct experience of it. You can say all of the right sort of things, but until you're actually doing it, it kind of falls flat.
it really falls flat. In fact, it often has the opposite effect,
Mm-hmm. And
because, yeah, you start to see the cracks and say, well, inauthenticity is really a big turnoff. And on the opposite side of that coin, a man who knows what he wants and is equipped to be able to go out and bring that into the world, I mean,
mm-hmm.
that is a magnetic force. And
Yes,
you
yes.
see it in business, you see it in relationship, you see it across the board. There is literally a gravitational pull when a man is crystal clear on what he wants and is equipped with his nervous system, his capacity to be able to, feel deeply, speak clearly, have strong boundaries, be equipped to be able to go after what he wants. I think that does become a gravitational force on its own. And one of the terms I've used around that, in terms of like engaging with other people, because I think it's really, that piece is, this is relational work, right? And what I refer to it is, leading with vulnerability. And what I find so much is when I have the courage to lead with vulnerability, regardless of the outcome, so many times, way more often than not, there's a pause, there's a space
Mm-hmm.
where a
Okay.
deeper response can come back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well put. I like that. And I think you're right. And exactly, if you can create the pause, oh, this isn't what I expected. I expected superficial, nice, polite, even if it's not intentionally inauthentic, it's just not deep. It's just casual, thrown off conversation or something. When you actually encounter somebody, honestly, people are taken aback. And in the pause, in that space, allows you the difference between reacting, which is what we would do to a surface engagement, the difference between reacting to that and then responding from a deeper place. And you
Hmm.
think you're right.
Hmm. Yeah. On that note, I've been sitting with something recently, and I'd love to hear your take on this, because I've been sitting with the idea of freedom. And you know, most of my life I've been told to, or kind of inherited the idea of pursuing financial freedom, pursuing time freedom. This idea that I can, do what I want, have the resources and the capacity to be able to do it. But I'm starting to believe that the deepest freedom that I truly long for is the capacity to choose my response in any given moment. So, in that space between the stimulus
And the
and
response.
whatever I do next is actually where my freedom lives. What do you think about that?
I think T.S. Eliot speaks to that exactly in Four Quartets. I wish I could quote the passage, but he says something between stimulus and response lies the, what did he say?
There is a space. Is that Viktor Frankl? Viktor
Viktor
Frankl,
Frankl.
Man's Search for
Viktor
Meaning as
Frankl
well.
says the same thing, but also T.S. Eliot, and it's in his Four Quartets, like four large poems he wrote
Okay.
towards the end. Between the stimulus and response lies, he might have put it in the negative, lies the shadow. He might have been speaking in difficult terms. I forget, but there's something there that's worth looking at. But I think it's true. And I mean, it's like that's hardwired in us. That's the space between synapses in our brain and between nerves, you know. And you're right. There's precisely the freedom that's there.
Hmm.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, freedom is part. in free will. Freedom is part of the very image of God in us. So it's part of the, the most fundamental and important, exalted, cherished parts of what it means to be human.
Mm.
And so when that's lost, when it's obscured, which is, where in the Christian tradition, we speak a lot, not just about sin, but about passions, which are like abiding bad habits, things that have us rather than we have them. So we talk more contemporarily about addictions, more, but you're just like bad patterns of thought, to be just being envious or victim, victim puking or whatever it is, and they're particularly bad because they become reactive ways of dealing with the world that precisely bypass our capacity for freedom. They become simply automatic responses to things. And so we're in fact just, living a script rather than actually engaging with the world. So yeah, yeah, you're onto something there. And I know there's quite a bit in the Buddhist literature and the Zen tradition precisely about that, about mindfulness. Um, and I've read a lot about their practices where they're precisely looking to be very mindful of what we're doing right now. Like think about walking across the room and each step that you take, and I'll just to like be
Mm.
fully present,
Mm.
in this moment. And in deeper prayer, there's, that whole, that all falls away. In um neurological studies, I mean, Stephen Kotler talks about that in flow state too, where you lose all sense of time and you're simply present in the moment for an extended interval. That's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
It really is. And I think it even goes back to what you mentioned earlier around like agency. Because I look around and I see no shortage of victims, like individuals who are more willing to blame and criticize and judge other people or other things for why their life is where it is. And I think coming back to choice, like I can't control all of the experiences at all, but I can control the meaning that I give to it and the
Yes.
response that I have
And my
to it. And
response.
that's where my agency and my
Yeah.
power actually lies.
Yes. And Viktor Frankl speaks very eloquently about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's a qualified man to speak on it.
Yes. Yes. Yes, he really is. Yeah.
A
I
man, go ahead.
please.
Okay. A man that's feeling directionless, powerless, maybe, struggling right now, whether he's lacking a place where he can have some real conversation or, totally directionless. Like, what is something that you would offer for them? Like, where could they start?
Okay, where I typically start with people, and that sort of speaks directly to kind of the approach that I take with a lot of one-on-one clients. Um, I help them to find. Well, I simply ask, where would you like to be 3 to 5 years from now? If you're not happy now, what would make you happy? What would life look like? Where would you be? And get as clear as possible on what that looks like. So I even wrote up a little script. This will probably be a freebie that I'll offer, on social media eventually. Just get a really clear, vivid vision of who it is you want to be. I don't care how realistic or unrealistic it is, but get really clear on that. And then ask yourself, who is the man that can actually have that? Okay. Because it ain't you today.
Hmm.
Otherwise you'd have it. Okay, now we have a path between where you want to be and where you are now. So let's figure out the steps then to get you there. And then look at things like changing up your environment to support it's this future self, just for shorthand. Just change your environment so that you're living your future self instead of yourself today. Um, Sometimes, I mean, there are even some little tricks that you can do it. I will you and your audience can laugh at me, if you want to and all, but I gave him a name. I know there are some people who think of an alter ego as to who he is down the line. I know if that's so. There is Dino Mike. I even put it on a mug with a
That's
lightning.
brilliant.
So, this ain't me today, but after January 1, when I'm retired, it's Dino Mike. And So I know who he is and what he's like and all, and I'm trying to live that today. But it helps me to get really clear on the man I want to be. And see, I'm even changing my environment because I now have a logo here. And I'll even go so far as this. I just yesterday, got this lovely little bracelet in the mail. I put it on in the morning when I sit down at my desk because it just reminds me, it's just a tangible symbol. Okay, I don't want to work the way I have been working. I don't want to think the thoughts I have been thinking. I need to be a little more productive and more focused on these sorts of things. And it's just a little reminder, because I don't typically wear things on my wrist, so I notice it a lot. It'll probably last until I get used to it, and then I'll forget about it. But for the moment, it's a constant reminder. Oh yeah, yeah. There's something I need to live up to, and so I'm going to pursue that. So yeah, when someone's feeling lost or purposeless, okay, let's find this purpose. And some people say, "Well, I don't know what that is." Well, okay, well, you got a general idea. I mean, even and start with even the least little amount of evidence that you have. Head this way, because a lot of guys they're paralyzed into inaction. And until you take a step, you have no data on which to make an evaluation. So head out this way. Maybe if oh dear God, that's absolutely the wrong way. I need to be going this way. Well, you've learned something. Your future ain't that way. It's over here. And then what we find is that by pursuing our path as best we can, it becomes narrower and narrower. We gain more data until we gain real clarity on where it is we have to go. So you need to start with even what little little bit that you have to work with. And if you really don't know where to start with your health.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
start with your health. Go to the gym, start walking, pick up martial arts, do something, but start with your health and focus on that. And as you get better, you get stronger, you sleep better, your mental state is better. Exercise is good for so many things. But start there and then stick with it and learn the things. Well, this is one of the reasons of course I pump iron. And so I'm very partial to that as a fundamental thing. That, what are the first lessons you learn from the gym? I mean, nobody, you won't see your physical progress for a month. No one else will. Your closest friends won't see it for 2 months, and the rest of the world won't see it for 3 months. So why should you stick to it? Because you make a plan, because you stick with a plan, because you learn to work through pain, because you learn to delay gratification, because you learn to do something you're uncomfortable doing. And when you learn, these are the first lessons that you learn. If you can work through pain in the gym, you can work through pain, sitting through finishing a script or, just about anything else that you've got to do. Because the skills, those are character traits. Those are not external traits like what we were talking about earlier, about changing the inside. That's where you'll gain confidence. That's where you'll gain certainty, and you'll gain a sense of self-esteem. My God, it ain't much, but by God, every day this week I got up at 5 o'clock, and 3 days a week I went to the gym. Man, that's not bad. I can do this. Then we gain confidence, and then things begin to multiply. And like James Clear says, 1% improvement every day, and next thing you know, it multiplies, and we're making significant strides. And it will spill over. It will spill over.
I love that. I love that. That's a real antidote to analysis paralysis, because I think you can almost over intellectualize this idea of purpose, right? It becomes, rather than this, faith-based or soul-led endeavor, it becomes some kind of analytical thing that needs to be written down and, compartmentalized and dialed into the exact
No, just start.
right. Just
Just
start.
start.
Yeah.
Do something. I remember the old priest told me, do something, even if it's wrong.
Yeah.
You'll figure out pretty quick that it's wrong, but at least you're doing something.
That's right.
And for the men of faith who may be listening, I come across a lot of guys, who are sort of paralyzed. Well, I don't know what God's will is for me. Like somehow God's going to decide one thing, and you're over here, making good money, loving your wife, raising your children with integrity, contributing to your community, and somehow this doesn't fulfill God's will. It's doing, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I think we can lay those aside as well.
1,000%. Yeah, that makes total sense, and that was something I was actually going to touch on that you spoke to. Is like, if you don't know where to start, Start with your health. Start with the social group that you've always been called to go to, but you've been hesitant or scared. Like, dude, like what's there's a poem from David White that I love dearly, and it's called "Start Close In." And he said,
Go
start close in. Start with the first step, not the second, not the third, but the step that you know. There at some part of us, we might not know 5 years, but there's
Yeah.
some part of us that knows the next step.
Yeah. And, I tell people that even in very difficult circumstances or where they're overwhelmed, what's the thing right in front of you?
Yeah.
Do the thing right in front of you, and you can, and scripture's clear this. It could be a blessing or it could be a curse. How are you going to respond to what's right here, right now? And especially people I know this with people who suffer from addiction, like who are in Alcoholics Anonymous or something, this moment is really difficult. You really want that bottle bad, but I'm going to choose sobriety. Maybe you have to choose sobriety again and again, over and over and over again, but just take the next step and do it right there. Yeah. I remember old Steve, Scott Galloway.
Hmm.
He does, some of his stuff on men's work is really very, very good. And except when his progressive politics get in the way, then I think he fudges his answers a little bit. I wish he wouldn't do that. Uh, but I remember he has like this fundamental thing that he says he teaches all young men that come to him. He says he has them do three things. He says, first, get freaky strong. So there's the exercise piece. He says, when you're 19 years old, you'll never be stronger in your life. And how does he put it? You ought to have a plan. When you walk into a room to either outrun or kill everybody that's around you. But get freaky strong because it'll teach you a lot. Second, get a job and earn money so that you can see what money can do for you. And then once you get a taste for what it can do for you, then you'll always want to work and you'll always contribute something. And third, get in a situation, get out of the house every single day so that you can get around other people who are not like yourself. And if you can learn to deal with anybody and everybody, that is a life skill that'll set you up forever. And those are not bad places to start. No? And I think he's onto something there.
Yeah, that is good wisdom. It doesn't need to be that complicated.
No. No.
Sometimes I'm sure even just trying to make it complicated is almost another excuse not to start.
Mm-hmm. And in which case, I see this a lot with the guys I work with. So all we do is we just keep breaking it down until it's an actionable step.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep breaking it down. If it's still too much, then it's not the smallest possible step.
Yeah. Big time. And I mean, for me, there's the goal setting piece, like you get that 5 years and then you break it down to the 3 year, to the 1 year, to the 90
Mm-hmm.
days. I think that's brilliant. And there's another piece that I really like around this idea of behavior change that you had even mentioned earlier, is where you are looking at like who is Dino Mike, and then actually like how is he living, how is he communicating, how is he
Mm-hmm.
showing up in his relationships, and
Mm-hmm.
rather than like that goal list, it's like how every day am I developing the characteristics of the man that is living that, because
Yeah.
as I become that man, I mean, the timeline almost collapses, and I will actually magnetize things to me from that state that my intellectual mind wouldn't even have fathomed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And it's remarkable when you can. It's It starts out as pretense,
Mm-hmm.
as make believe,
Right.
acting as if. Um, but I think I'm okay with that. And in the beginning, it feels fake. Who am I to act like that? But maybe I'm just old enough to where I can laugh at myself a lot easier than I could when I was younger. But, you know, a- nobody needs to know. Yeah. I didn't need to show you my cup. I didn't need to tell anybody, but I'm having fun with it. And I think Nido Mike is just the coolest thing I've come up with in ages. So, and so, that's all fine. But, just begin acting differently. or I remember, what was it? There was some book about, oh gosh, I can't remember the name. All the books I read. There was a guy where he was talking about an English boating team, a rowing team, and I guess they were headed for the Olympics or something, and they got England had never won medals or something in ages, and finally they got a coach, and he had one question: does it make the boat go faster?
Hmm.
Okay, well, we're going to do hey, we're going to go out we're going to party out. We're going to go get a pint at the pub Friday night. Does it make the boat go faster? Oh, no, it doesn't. Then we ain't going to the pub on Friday night. We're going to put in another session, something like that. But that was just it. Is this what Dynamite would do?
Yeah.
No.
That's it.
Or my hero, or whoever it is. Maybe you look up to somebody else, is, you were mentioning you were finding sort of freedom and discipline earlier. So it reminded me of Jocko Willink. Is this what Jocko would do?
Right. Right.
Or whoever your hero is, man. It's fine. Is that what he would do? And if it's not, don't do that. If you're a Christian, the old "What Would Jesus Do" bands. Not a bad way to start. I think there's more to it than that, but it's not a bad place to start.
I think it's an excellent starting point, and that's where we can draw on mentors who've come before us living or who've passed, who've already developed a bit of a roadmap, and you like part of where they've ended up, and then you look at their traits and start to dissect how they show up day to day. What were their habits? What were their routines? There's so many autobiographies now these days too. You can literally sit down and have in-depth conversation with somebody who's going to share with you so many aspects of how they showed up, how they work through struggles. There's infinite amount of information out there. So I think really, yeah, find somebody that inspires you. If you don't know what you want, if you don't know where you're going, look at somebody else whose life that you think is really inspiring. Start there.
Mm-hmm.
Get to know that a little bit more and dissect that. I think it's, again, a great starting point. And then as they move forward, more clarity will emerge inevitably.
Yes. And it also is, I like particularly the idea of looking at biographies and such, because it breaks that attitude of constant envy or self-criticism. Oh, I can't do anything. I'm not like that. I'll never achieve what he achieved, whatnot. No, it's actually emulating and admiring other men is an antidote to envy and jealousy and thinking small about yourself. It opens up possibility that I could maybe do the same thing. No? And I mean, I mentioned briefly, I started competitive bodybuilding when I was 53 years old. Would I ever look like Arnold? No. First place, he was more juiced than a third grade lunch table. So there's no way I could. But I mean, I don't have the recovery. I don't have the strength. I don't have the flexibility of guys who are half my age. I would never look like them. But could I look pretty good for a 53 or a 60-year-old man? Oh yeah. So I did, and it was okay. And okay, so I started very late, something that I wished I'd done. I have regret that I didn't start it earlier, but I made the best of it with what I had, and I'm very glad I did it. And I was pleased with the results that I got, and have enjoyed it. And some of the best friends I ever made, I made in the gym, and on the stage and backstage. I still have friends like that to this day. So it's good, but emulating other men and seeing that, and in fact, that's how my story started. I was 8 years old. Same year my dad died, so they're probably linked. I'm almost certain they're linked. And in the back of comic books, for you young guys, comic books are like graphic novels, but they were cheap, and we had them when I was a kid. But in the back of comic books, do you remember the Charles Atlas ad? Mm-hmm. The little cartoon about the guy kicking sand in the face and the bully and all of that. So I want to look like that. That was the first inspiration. I remember it from being 8 years old, And so, again, admiring another man rather than being jealous of him. Well, what was that? There was, I remember now, there's a line. There were, there's two approaches to that. There are some people who see a man on top of a hill and they're inspired to climb the same hill. And there are other people who see a man on top of the hill and they want to tear down the hill. There's two fundamentally different attitudes, towards life. And again, the bitter, hateful, resentful, especially young men, with burnt out souls for whom life has been difficult, or again, to circle back, they have no meaning or purpose, and don't see any future, or for whatever reason are disaffected, disconnected from others, brooding in isolation. It's really unfortunate. It pains me to see it when there's potential there. And so again, I don't know how you can flip that attitude except, to expose yourself to possibilities. And again, I think Scott Galloway's right. Get out of the basement, get out of the house, go be around other people, see what's possible,
Yeah.
see what other people are doing.
Yeah. And it almost comes first full circle back to that approval seeking behavior, like be
Yeah.
okay to make mistakes. Like start to expand the capacity to be able to fall flat on your face and know that you got back up. Because if you're here and you're listening to this, it means you've fallen flat on your face and you're still undefeated, because every time you've fallen, you've gotten back up. And to
Yes.
know, yeah,
Oh God, I say this so often in confession. I really do. We do. So yeah. Oh, I forget who said it. You're not defeated until you quit.
right.
Sometimes you get back up and get in. So, there are a lot of young men who have issues with porn, which is just an accelerant for masturbation and all. But they come with a lot of guilt with that. And they don't want to be slaves to this or to anything else, and they're ashamed to come and tell me week after week or, repeatedly, that they've fallen again. And I said, never be ashamed to confess the same thing. Okay, you fell. Get back up and get back in the fight. Always get back up and get back into the fight, because when you get back up and get back into the fight, even if you're bloodied, that's where the grace comes.
Mm.
In religious terms, that's when God rewards us, when we get back into the fight. I don't think God cares so much that we fell. I think he cares much more that we got back up, repented, and got right back into the fight and pursued it again. I think he's looking for that more. And anytime when we get knocked down and we get back up, and yeah, that failure, it's hard. It's hard. And I had trouble with failure when I was younger until I learned that it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. That's how you learn. What is it? You win or you learn. I think John Maxwell had a book called that one time. You either win or you learn.
Yep.
So you just learned another way not to do it. And the older that I've gotten, and here's a bit of elder whiz for you. Yeah, failure is bitter, but regret is 10 times worse. It's 10 times worse. 45 years I waited between the time I saw Charles Atlas in a comic book and I decided to get serious in the gym. Why did I wait 45 years? When I found it was one of the most rewarding things I ever did. Because I was scared. Because I was intimidated by the big guys in the gym. Because I was the fat kid. And even in middle age, my waist kept up with my age through my 30s. Yeah, 36-inch waist at 36, 40-inch waist at 40. Yeah, I couldn't go on forever. I was really like that. And I was ashamed of myself. And so I didn't do anything. Wasted a lot of time. And so this is one of the real motivations for why I do men's work. It's because I live with so much regret. I don't want you younger guys to end up the way I am, regretting things you didn't do, paths you never took, relationships you never tried, adventures you never went for because you were scared or you were intimidated or something else. Can't get it back.
That's some serious elder wisdom right there.
Yeah. So it gives me, I take vicarious joy in seeing younger men say, "You're right. Damn it, I'm going for it."
Yeah.
And then they do.
Yeah.
And whether they win or lose, it doesn't matter. They went for it. When too often I hesitated. And nothing is served by hesitation. Nothing is served by us playing small.
No, I mean, quite the opposite. It becomes a disservice. And, if somebody's got this big grandiose idea, they don't need to take one bite, like you want to find the woman of your dreams, start by going and asking somebody on a date and expecting a no. Like go find a no. Go find the
You go
place that
find
you're going to get rejected and fall on your face. Go do something that's small and scares you, just to, enough for it to be risky feeling. But it doesn't have to be, I'm going to pull out my entire bank account or a line of credit and launch this new business. Like, start with the micro moment.
a little one. Yeah. Yeah. Just do a little bit. And this is the thing. And I remember in David Data, like the first 15 chapters of his book, Way of the Superior Man, I think is stupendous, where he talks about pushing your edge and leaning into your fear,
Yeah.
not jumping in with both feet. I mean, no one's talking about being rash or stupid here. Just lean into it, push just a little bit. And when you're done with it, take a step back, wipe your brow, regroup until you're ready to do it again. Then lean a little more. And every time that we find we've managed a little further, a little further, a little further before we have to pull back. And in time, you will amaze yourself at how far you can penetrate into your fear. You look back and say, wow, I couldn't have done that a month ago. And you will be a different man.
Yeah. And a man others will gravitate to, a man you trust.
Yes.
And a man
Yes,
others
that
will.
is a beautiful phrase. A man others will gravitate to. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you have that.
As we start to bring this to a close, is there anything that you'd like to share or leave with anyone listening, maybe a younger man who's been in, spiraling or not even realizing it, but just looking for something?
We've kind of touched on all of the highlights of the things I typically say to people. I guess I would simply maybe repeat again, even if it's hard to believe now, that each of us is a beloved son. It just simply, in fact, of being a human being, we have inherent value. And each person is deserving of respect and deserving of love. And that each of us has so much potential. Maybe we don't think of it now, or it's hard to see what do I have to offer the world. Sometimes just our presence, sometimes a sense of humor. Again, a kind word to somebody else, simply to be around and to be available. Maybe to your snotty-nosed kid sister or something like that, just to spend a little time with her if that's all it is. But anything that takes us out of ourselves where we can make even a tiny contribution to the world. Like Jordan Peterson says, make your bed. Uncle Jordan, since we're roughly the same age, I call him Uncle Jordan. Uncle Jordan says, just make your bed. Why? Because by doing that, you have in a tiny way brought order out of chaos. The world is a better place because your bed is made. So if that's where you need to start there. But make the world a better place. Contribute a little bit of something. You may not think it's much, but even small gestures like that, studies have shown, vastly improve your mood because it's a win. You collect your endorphins, you collect your little dopamine. I won. Okay. I got out of bed. Yes. For some guys, that's a major struggle. I got out of bed. I got my teeth brushed. I made the bed. I made it to work on time. Hey, team me. Yay. But for some guys, it's a big win. So, but do what you can. You do what you can, not what you can't. And if we start there, we find that just by being persistent and consistent action, consistency, you just get the ball rolling. Because very often life is rather like a flywheel, which is like a really big, heavy wheel or a stone that's like almost impossible to get going. But because it's so massive and heavy, once it gets going, it's even harder to stop. And so you just get it going, and maybe it's just grinding slowly around, but just keep at it and a little bit more. Like maybe an easier image, like the merry-go-rounds, on the playgrounds, you get them started going, but it doesn't take much to keep them going once they're going. And that's the way it is with so many of our habits. It's always most difficult to start. So if you can compel yourself to start, you'll probably be okay. I don't know. That's some random stuff off the top of my head, but there it is.
I think that's a pretty damn good message for anybody to hear, regardless of what stage they're at. But anybody that's resonated listening to this, where could they find you? I'll make sure to link it all in the show notes below.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. They can find me website, sort of my brand name, Average to Alpha, which looks like that. I wore the shirt for the occasion. AVG numeral 2 alpha.com will find my website. They can see what I do, the coaching I offer, the online group that I'm just starting up right now. Also, the same handle. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, a bit on YouTube, and God help me, TikTok. My business coach told me to go to TikTok, so I'm there, but I don't. I think I'm going to abandon the place. It's not really serving me well. Mostly Instagram. And they can leave me a message on the website, direct message me on Instagram. I answer all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if I can be of service, I'm happy to be of service. And there it is.
Thank you, man. Thanks so much for the time, Father Michael. You are an elder officially now in the making, and full of wisdom. And I always enjoy our conversations.
I enjoy it too. I enjoy it too. I was really looking forward to this. And as usual, it did not disappoint.
Well, thank you.